a physical correction in a canine psychology thought process. The analogy I would use is a puppy is bothering the mother puts it in its place and rolls it on its back and puts its mouth on the puppy. Or they're eating at a dead elk and the young dog thinks he's full of himself and comes up, and the alpha comes up and chews his ass out, and now he has to wait till the end to eat, right? Physical correction from the superior, change the behavior from the other dog, and put them in their place, right? But again, it's just changing the brainwave. It's flipping a switch. It's snapping them out of it. Whatever's getting them fired up to go and bang, they get nailed with a leash, right? And again, that bang can be a light flick of the wrist, or it can be a good jab. Depends on the dog, depends on the situation, da 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 da. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Lone Duck's Gun Dog Chronicles. We've got a repeat guest. You love him, you know him. It's Kevin Cheff, the Retriever Coach. Really excited to talk about today's topic. And basically, we're going to go on a deep dive of building a young retriever to be a team player. And one of the topics that we're going to kind of do a deep dive in is composure and noise issues. And it's a epidemic almost. And I bet you daily and definitely weekly, I'm getting questions on my dog's noisy in the duck blind, my dog's noisy in the holding blind, my dog's noisy. And there's a lot of things that we can do to mitigate it, prevent it, build it, etc. So, Kevin, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you back, man. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was a very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I love sharing or having conversations like this with you and other people. I learn a lot in the process, so it's always a pleasure to do that. And I'm happy to share what I know with the people that are out there listening to your podcast. You do a great service for our retriever community, so thank you for that.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you too. We do appreciate everybody that tunes in week after week to listen to us jibber jabber about dogs and ducks. So, but this really is a topic that is an epidemic, right? I mean, it's difficult to fix. It's easier to prevent. And one of the things that we're going to dive into is kind of how we got here, right? You know, I'm going to let you take over, but in essence, it's like the history of the breed that we've been generation after generation developing, and the strengths and weaknesses of the breeding programs.
Yeah, I think first of all, if we kind of got to know where we are and how we got here before we can start to come up with a plan that's going to help us manage these really high-powered dogs. And if we look at our history, if we go back to the 70s when the e-collar was implemented, it was just such a crude instrument that dogs had to be tough to endure. And not only was our e-collar crude and tough back then, so were our training methods. They were crude. They were not very well developed. And I'm not calling shame on any of the retriever trainers back then. I mean, evolution takes time. And so that's all they only had what they knew. But dogs had to be tough. And so the ones that were not mentally and emotionally tough were weeded out, and our breeding evolved to develop really high-powered dogs that were passionate about retrieving and could endure the demands of that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me go into that for 1 second, because when you think about breeding, what are we looking for when we pick a puppy? We're looking at health clearances. We're looking at hunt test and field trial titles. And so to earn those titles, those dogs had to withstand the tough training tactics. So, and we call them washouts, right? So if, you know, your little dog Sam wasn't tough enough mentally to withstand the pressures of the time, they'd get sent home, rehomed, and not bred because it wasn't, in essence, cutting it, right? So you were getting the cream of the crop, hitting the trials and whatnot, getting the titles, and getting bred, and therefore we kept breeding those kind of dogs until training has improved and the collars improved and tactics and things, right? So like in essence, back in the day, you continuously bred good or the good dogs were the tough ones because the other ones got tossed out. And maybe if they had the training that we do now, they wouldn't have been tossed out, right?
Well, that brings up another point. So training has evolved since the 70s, of course. Our methods are have evolved to be quite a bit more, how would you put it? I mean, more thoughtful, I guess, more strategic. And so we're using less physical pressure on the dogs in terms of the tools, the physical tools that we use. There's a lot more teaching that goes on. But what has increased is the physical demands of the test, the mental demands of the test. A test back in the 70s might have taken 10 minutes to complete at the most. A test today, if you're running field trials, could take 30 minutes to complete. The complexity of the test is much greater. So these physical demands, the emotional demands still require a dog with a great deal of fortitude, even though we're not putting the kinds of physical pressure that I was talking about before on the dog. So we're still breeding them to be very high powered, driven to get the bird. Our dogs only have one thing in mind, and that is I've got to get the bird. It's going to save my life. If I don't get the bird, I'm going to die. That's what they believe. It comes at a price, right? We've bred these dogs to be high powered, but they're a little bit different today than they were back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, they had to be, in the 80s, they had to be really tough. Today, they're high powered and driven, but I think they're more emotionally sensitive or they're more reactive to pressure. My
Mm-hmm.
experience has taught me, if I can go on a little bit more about this, if you'll allow me, is that if we think we can put the same level of e-collar pressure or physical pressure on a dog, what happens is the dog shuts down mentally. They're still driven to retrieve, but they can't think as clearly. And they tend to be more reactive, meaning this reactivity is the noise, the creeping. Every time we stimulate them with birds and duck calls and things that say, hey, you're about to get this thing that's going to save your life, we get reactivity, which comes out as noise and whatnot. Now, I don't think I answered your question. So can you remind me what your question was? Because I just want to make sure we were clear on what we've got today, a different dog than the 80s.
Sure. So I think with the advent of new training techniques and the advent of better e-collars that can give a low-level stimulation or crank it up, we have that fine tuning and our techniques have gotten better. So those sad Sally Sues who used to get washed out are now able to be brought to a high level, accomplish the hunt test and field trial titles, and they're getting bred. And that's why now we have dogs that are exactly what you just described. Super high drive, super, giddy up and go, yet when perceived pressure, physical pressure, collar pressure, the pressure of the perceived pressure of like the actual test in front of them, the setup, they can get a little bit nervous or cautious,
Panicky.
panicky, or like, let's talk about I don't want to digress too much, but the noise issue where like the anxiety, I'm doing air quotes for everybody listening, anxiety has to come out somewhere. The bite dog people call it leaking. So it leaks somewhere. It leaks in vocalizations, whining, barking, like even dogs are just like it's like breathing fire or
Yes.
pitter pattering and they just can't settle. And they can't settle and no matter what you do pressure wise or there's 800 different ways we can try and tackle it, and we'll talk about that today. But they can also be like very like soft, so they can be like ears pinned back and like nervous, and then ball of fire, and then nervous, and then ball of fire, and it's a wild balancing act at times.
It really is a balance. I think it's a balancing act for sure. I think there's more to talk about and what that is, but you're right. These dogs are more sensitive, and we can often mistake their enthusiasm for retrieving for a lack of sensitivity. But it has become clear to me that at a certain point, the pressure becomes great enough, and we might not even think it's that great. But what we're seeing is it manifests in these ways that you're talking about. Is, the bite people call it leaking. So in the past, if I can add a little bit on here, in the past, our lack of knowledge led us to believe that these dogs were just being undisciplined, and that we had to point a finger at the right spot to spank them the right way to get them to be quieter, sit on the mat better, walk to the line with us more neatly, be more of a team player. But again, as we gain more experience, and you and I and other people have conversations like this, and we start talking about, well, this is what I'm seeing, that's what you're seeing. Wow, that really makes sense, because you've already brought up some things I hadn't even thought about tonight. We're getting a better understanding of the problem, and I think that's going to allow us to get a better grasp of the problem. And that's really what we're here to do tonight, is talk about these noise and composure issues are not things that we can point a finger directly at and fix. There needs to be a holistic approach where we look at the dog's entire life, their lifestyle, right from the get-go, and
Right.
what we're doing to manage these dogs to make sure as they grow, as they mature, as they turn into a dog that is more in control of their decision making. Puppies are not in control of their decision making.
Right.
They can't even control their bladders practically. But as they get older, they realize that they do have a certain level of control. And if we don't shape their lives in a certain way right from the start, we're not going to have that team player that we need, that quiet and composed dog.
So let's take this in a two-part uh, segment, right? We're gonna have two segments to kind of kick off. The first segment, let's talk about you getting an 8-week-old puppy, and it'll be like the research you did to find one that you want, and then how you're going to raise it as a team player. And then the second segment will be, I'm a professional dog trainer, and I've got this 8-month-old that I didn't raise, I didn't pick the puppy, and I've got these problems, and now what do I do? Or if so facto, somebody buys a dog, they've raised it to the best of their ability, and now at 8 months, a year old, we've got these issues, and how are we going to tackle them? So if we break it up, then we won't be bouncing around as much. Let's talk about what is Kevin Cheff looking for in picking the right dog, and then your 8 weeks to 6 months kind of shaping that team player.
So again, we really have to look at the dog's entire life and what we're trying to achieve with this dog that we have. Are we looking for a pet, or are we looking for a dog that's going to be able to do one of the most difficult sports you can actually play with a dog, that requires a high level of discipline in a very complex and a stimulating environment? You've got to choose that right off the bat, and you can't make that decision a year from now when the problem is so ingrained. We're just trying to chase things that we can't catch.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, I think every listener here needs to say, I don't want a pet. Yes, we can have a dog that is something that we share the home with and we enjoy spending time with. But we can't let them have the run of the house like we would a pet. A pet doesn't have, most pets in America anyway, don't have very many rules. I watch people walk their dogs down the street every day. They've got them on harnesses, and they all think they're sled dogs. They're pulling. They have no respect. They don't respond to the owner's commands or anything like that. And that stems again from the same sort of thing, where in where in 90% or 95, actually, let me put it this way, because I think it'll be clearer to you. If you go out and train, for 15 minutes a day, or perhaps it might be a little longer or a little shorter, and you're only training 3 days a week or 4 days a week. Some people are only training 2 days a week, and you demand this ultra high standard for discipline for that 10 minutes or 15 or 30 minutes. So let's say it's a total of 40 or 50 minutes a week. And the other rest of the period of time, 12 or 7 times 20, 24
Much
minus
math
the,
for me, bud.
yeah, right. But you get where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
and you let them rule the roost or make decisions that allow them to believe. You mislead them into believing that the hierarchy in your relationship with your dog is that they sit on top. They get to run around the house, do whatever they want, bark when people come to the door, open up the door and they go busting out. They get to, beg at the table, or every time they go up to you and ask you for something, you give in to their demands, whether you might not even know it. Like they come up to you and they nudge your hand and you start petting them. Right. Who initiated that? Who demanded it? Every time they come up to the table or look at you with a smile and you think they're cute, you throw a treat at them. Who demanded it? Right. They did. And who acquiesced? You did. So you are allowing them to believe that they sit at the top of the food chain, that you're there to serve them, that you give in to their demands when they want it. And that's got to end if you want to have a retriever that's going to be a team player that respects you, respects your boundaries, and meets your standards. So we can kind of dive into that a little bit, and what kind of things can we do differently?
I think we should dive into that. I 100% think we should dive into that, because you hit the nail on the head. I think most people, especially like if I sell them a puppy, it's 80-20 rule. 80% of the time it's a family pet, 20% of the time it's going to be a training buddy, hunting buddy, and whatever. It's that other 80% that we have to have rules, boundaries, and limitations. That's some Cesar Millan quote. Rules, boundaries, and limitations. If the dog is raised from the minute you get it home that there are certain things it's allowed to do, certain things it's not allowed to do, praise when it earned, not all the time. So one of the things that, or an analogy I use for people is, Kevin, what is your favorite meal? Like, I'm taking you out to dinner. What are you getting every single time?
Spaghetti.
Okay. Well, now you're having spaghetti, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next month. Oh, all of a sudden, your spaghetti is going to become devalued, right? And so if every time they nudge your arm, if every time they look cute, they're getting love, affection, attention, they bark at you and you get up and let them out, like every time, to your point, you're at their beck and call, they're not earning anything. They need to learn how to earn to get your love, to get your affection. They need to understand that chewing the carpet isn't cute, it's a pain in the butt, right? And there's a correction behind it. And if I say no 10 times and I finally lose my patience and on the 10th time I get up and fix it, well, it just learned that it's going to take me 10 times to do something. So no holds no water, right? And so you're just in this young developing sponge of a brain. They're learning that there almost are no rules and they don't really understand them because of lack of consistency. B, affection is kind of like the spaghetti analogy. Well, I don't have to I don't need to do that. I'm not trying hard to get that because I'm going to get it any other time throughout the day. And that there's really no consequences. And so if consequences don't really matter and the praise doesn't really matter because they get it willy-nilly, now you've got a dog that doesn't really have black and white and understanding. It's just gray. And that gray, to your point, is where the hierarchy in dog psychology breaks down. They think they rule the roost or at least are equal to you, and that's not good. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because you had some great examples in your outline of like what that really means and how it can manifest later.
Yeah. I think that, there's sort of some things we need to sort of understand is that yes, we can still have a great relationship with our dog. We can love on them, and it's a give and take relationship. But we definitely have to plan to establish a hierarchy in our relationship so that the dog clearly understands that we're the alpha in the relationship. That we must also under help the dog understand that there's actually, let me rephrase that. We need to do that by making sure that there's structure in the dog's life, so that there's some consistency there. We need to make sure that we set boundaries and establish standards. So let's talk about all of that a little bit. I think in terms of boundaries, what are everybody should ask themselves, what are my boundaries for my dog? Do they get to sleep on the bed with me? Do they get to jump on the couch anytime they want? Do they get to bark and run up to the door when somebody knocks on it, or when I open up the door? Do they bust out the door when I'm getting the food bowl ready? Do I allow them to push me around or bark at me or jump up and down? Even the subtlest things can be a way that a dog tries to intimidate you or push you into giving into their demands more quickly. So if or do they come to the table and beg? So if you're allowing, did you? I see you wanting to talk here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take that example right there. Barking at you when it's feeding time, barking to get let out of the crate, jumping up and down and or like just the two paws that are pounding. If they're doing that for feeding time or getting let out the door to go to the bathroom or whatever, and they're allowed to do that every day, all day, but then we expect them to sit at the line perfect for the thing that they love more than food, which is retrieving. That's the gray area I was talking about earlier. Like, of course, it's going to bleed into the other dimension, into the other realm. So, having those rules and things that you just talked about, like, no, I don't let you do that. And you can develop a puppy so much easier to not allow it and to teach
Right.
them it's not how we act. You act
Yeah,
like this, and then you get the food.
that's right. Once we say that there are boundaries in the everyday life, we'll talk what needs to happen beyond boundaries. But once we establish that there are boundaries, and you don't blur the lines, those boundaries are hard and fast, so that the dog understands there are standards that they need to meet
Mhm.
in their everyday life. The other 24 hours per day, 7 days a week, less the 50 minutes that we train, if we have boundaries there and standards that the dog understands they need to meet, then how do you think things are going to turn out when you go to line in that highly stimulating environment? Or how much easier is it going to be to accomplish achieving the standards you need to achieve there? We need to lead these dogs to believe that they are responsible for upholding standards all of the time, not just for 50 minutes a week,
Yeah.
and that are boundaries.
And I still like I'll caveat this with I'm sure we've been rolling for 20 minutes about being strict and structured and holding the dogs to a standard. I will caveat it that I also like to raise a puppy that has confidence in themselves and has this respect bravado, right? Like when you take them on a hike, they're looking around and being adventurous instead of like looking to me like, "Are we cool? We can I go over there?" Like I think that there's a happy medium of give and take. I think the rules in the house like that will translate really great to training in the field. But I also think that there are some people that may be listening to this that may say, I'm going, like, there's no fun. I'm a drill sergeant. And that can lead into a puppy that lacks self confidence when the going gets tough later in life.
Everything is always a balance, right? And I think that's a good point. I forget about those people that are drill sergeants and they follow every rule to a T,
Right.
and then and I forget about them because the majority of people are far on the other side. But yes, I would remind everybody out there that that's an excellent point, that there has to be balance. And we have to understand where the dog is mentally and emotionally at each individual stage of a dog's life. A dog at 8 weeks is totally different from a dog at 12 weeks of age or 16 weeks of age or 5 months of age. That's why we don't start force fetch at 8 weeks of age. They just can't handle it. And so we'll talk about the different things that kind of need to go on along the way. But yes, very important point. But I think uh, there certainly needs to be a cultural shift amongst the retriever community to be careful. I'm gonna swing the pendulum the other way now, though, with those people that tend to not have many rules or standards or structure in a dog's life. Um, that a lot of people are a little lazy. I'm lazy. I'm going to say it. I'm lazy. Um, I'm going to do as little work as I have to, uh, as long as it doesn't, create a huge problem. But oftentimes, by the time we realize there's a huge problem, it's too late. And
Right.
these dogs are bred with a ton of bottom end. Don't forget what our conversation was at the beginning. They're they love to retrieve. You'll get some that aren't quite as excited to retrieve, but the majority of them they really want to retrieve. So I think we're okay there. I think we're okay there. What's the majority? Do you get people calling you for help, Bob? Number one.
Yeah, I usually send those to
I would
voicemail.
imagine I would imagine you get a lot of messages and calls, and I do. We're both kind of in the same boat here. I would say the number one call I get is my dog won't sit, my dog won't walk with me, my dog is making noise. That's
Yeah.
the number one problem amongst American retrievers today, the most prevalent one.
Yeah. I would say it is. The other is, and I'm going to caveat again, just because we talked about the pendulum swinging to both ways, right? If I've got a dog in training that lacks retrieve drive, I'm going to be looser on my structure and discipline. So
Absolutely.
train the dog in front of you. This podcast is not for the lazy dog. This podcast is for the dog that is batshit crazy and we're trying to contain it. So everybody who is now has a slower dog with lower drive, you can still listen, but just be careful, right? You don't have to go to town on the dog and be overly structured. You need to make sure that we maintain what we've got. But this podcast is for the crackheads.
No, I don't. I don't think that's it. I mean, again, it's a balance, and every dog is an individual, and you've got to look at them as an individual, and always look at them as an individual today, not necessarily what they were yesterday. But I'm not talking about going down and cracking down in the retriever environment. I'm talking about just very when you hear what the process is, you go, oh, this is all the things I would have done for my child if I would have had a child to make sure they turned out to be a great adult. This is
Yes.
not this is not, let's really talk about the culture that's going on right now with most people and their puppies. They treat them like a stuffed teddy bear that is the most beautiful thing in the world, brings them the most joy, and everything is so cute until it's not.
Right.
And if we treated our children like that as they grew into adults, if we didn't set boundaries in their daily lives, if we didn't set expectations, if we didn't have standards that we expected them to meet, and it doesn't mean we have to come down on our children with the wrath of God every time they make a mistake. That's not where we're going with this. It just
Right.
means we have to have structure and consistency and standards that we ask them to meet. So by the time they turn into an adult, our child is going to be a good citizen, a member of society that will contribute. That's all we're talking about here. The cultural
Yeah,
shift that.
that's a great analogy.
Hmm.
Great analogy. And
So
I
why
do
don't we
find that
go ahead?
most people do like, oh, I raised great kids and yeah, of course I, you know, disciplined when I needed to and had rules to follow and I'm like, then what are you doing with this little a-hole that's running your house? And it's a 7 month old black Labrador. Like, and it's to your point, it's the cutest, it's my baby, the kids moved out and now like, yeah, you're right. It's a great analogy. Um, so again, let's take we
Let's
we
get
kind of
into it.
hit most of it, but if you're picking a puppy, what are you picking to try and mitigate certain things? How are we looking at that?
Well, you kind of nailed it on the head with what people are currently looking at. They look at the pedigree to see what titles are in front of every dog's name. That's the first thing they all look at.
Mhm.
Who's in the pedigree? And it isn't like what are the character traits of these dogs? It's what's their performance traits that they look at first and foremost. What was the other thing you mentioned? There was two things for sure that stood out to me. Uh,
Boy.
Boy, yeah, I'm really putting you on the spot now. Um, I think that's the one that most people look at primarily. Oh, it was clearances. That was the other one.
Yeah.
That's very important, but I think that's standard across the industry now. Nobody's buying a puppy without clearances. If they are, they're probably maybe they're not aware of what the dangers are if you don't have those clearances.
Yeah.
So, but the pedigree is a small part of what we should be looking at. We should be investigating much more deeply because you're going to have this dog for 12, 13, 14, 15 years. You're going to have to live with whatever character traits these dogs have. And DNA is, I mean, it is it really dictates who these dogs become in most cases. If it didn't, we wouldn't be looking at pedigrees. So not only should we be looking at performance, but we should be looking at who are these dogs? What are they like when, in terms of their behavior? So how do you do that? You talk to the owner first. Is your dog high powered? Is your dog more level headed? Um, would you say that your dog is tough? And you're not often going to get honest answers there, but you're going to get some indication. So that's the first place you're always going to start because that's who you talk to first. You also should be talking to people that get to see these dogs all the time. Where do they train? Who are they training with? Who watches them in competitions? What are they like in competitions? Do they walk to line? Are they quiet? Do they look like team players? Are they cooperative? All of those things. Um, that's where people miss the boat. Is right there. They simply look at a pedigree. Oh, this looks great. That's what people will send me. They'll send me a pedigree and say, Kevin, what do you think? Well, the pedigree looks great, but what do you know about the parents? And most people will just look at the father. That's Most people don't go past the father. They're like, okay, this is the sire that I want my puppy out of. We got to look well beyond that. And that's if we're just talking about picking the right breeding. That's where we need to go, is talking more to people about what are these dogs like.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because we breed a few times a year, and I like knowing the male dogs. We can go, and I've done it before. I've bred Clooney. I've had straws shipped in from here and there. But there is something to be said for like the high achieving dogs that I've seen grow up from someone else who trained it that I train with in the wintertime. Or, it's a good friend of mine and I've seen the process. And, do they get along with other dogs? What are they like? Because there's a high likelihood that the puppies are going to take after pieces of the mother, pieces of the father. It's never perfect, but it's dang close, and that's why we look at pedigree and all that, like you had mentioned. But I think the character traits of what makes a great dog is imperative, not just the two or three letters before or two or three after. You know what I mean? The name.
Absolutely.
Very great insight.
I th- I think another part we have to where we can get more information too is if these dogs have been bred before, there's going to be other people who have puppies that or dogs that are aging a little bit, and so you get more information there. What are they producing? Not what's their performance. That's always one that we know, right? We can research that very easily. But what is their personality like? Are they team players? Do you enjoy running them? Are they quiet? Do they go to line with you? Um, are they problem solvers? That's another big one I like to know. That sort of thing. I think those are things we need to look at. And so it's the onus is on us to do more research rather than just the pedigree. Get on the phone, talk to people. People love to talk anyway. So just
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, great point. Now, you got your puppy. We picked the one that's going to be, the pedigree's there, the traits that we want to have are there, the health clearances are there. We talked a lot about the structure in the house, the praise and consequences and rules, boundaries, limitations. Um, but how are we doing? Like,
Let's get into specifics.
yeah, we can get into specifics in the house again if you. I kind of feel like maybe we could, or like, all
I
right,
think we.
okay, go ahead.
Um, So obviously, when you get your puppy home at 7 or 8 weeks, depending on when you get it, those puppies are still, they're not quite ready for real training, the kind of training that we're talking about. They still need another week or two to kind of develop mentally and emotionally. But during that time, we can often, begin to teach them a bit about our relationship, a bit about how to learn and the rewards from learning. So that always, for me, it's always treat training. If I can get treat training started, I'm going to teach the dog some skills that they're going to need to allow me to enforce some of the standards I'm talking about later. So sit and hear, their name. Those are probably the primary ones. Another one would be place. Those are the four sort of ideal commands that I can think of off the top of my head in a moment that are going to be tools you're going to need. And like I said, you're developing a relationship. Your dog will learn that, oh, when I respond to what Bob wants me to do, I get rewarded for it. I like working with Bob. I like trying to figure out what Bob's asking me to do, because when I get it right, I get a treat. So
Right.
you're starting to develop that relationship. But probably at about, 10, 11, 12 weeks of age, you've got some tools built in there now. Your dog understands um, commands, and you can begin to, and they're not, you got to remember, they're not commands at that point. They're just things that we ask them to do.
Yeah.
But we can start to develop some standards. So I've taught you to sit. Now, if you don't sit, I'm going to enforce the standard. Meaning, if I ask you to sit, and you don't, I'm going to pick up the lead, because on a puppy, a young dog that's in the house, I always have a 3 to 4 foot short piece of parachute cord on them. I have to have some level of control to enforce those standards. So they might have a flat collar on. Some puppies are a little tougher. They might have a pinch collar on, but that just depends. Every dog's a little bit different. Probably not likely a pinch collar yet, but some of our puppies are very high powered. Remember, every one is an individual, but at the very least, a flat collar. And if I ask them to sit and they don't sit, I'm going to enforce it. I'm going to grab the lead. I'm going to give it a little snap up or back and down toward the tail, and I'm going to say sit. So now the dog is going to start to realize that it's not an ask, it's an actual demand, and that there's a standard. So that's kind of the first place we start, is starting to turn some of these commands. We're not using a lot of pressure. We're not throwing the puppy around. We're not really trying to startle them. And every time I make one of those corrections, I'm gauging their reaction. I'm measuring it. How did the dog react? Do I need to increase the lead pressure, or do I need to decrease the lead pressure? Remember, they're not made of glass. They're not going to break, but you can overdo it for sure.
Sure.
And you do want to hurt their feelings a little bit. It's supposed to be a consequence that makes the dog go, woof, what did I just do? What do I need to change about my behavior so I don't get into trouble again?
Mhm.
We're not there to mollycoddle them either. So um, now that we are starting to get some of these standards in place in terms of reaction to a command, the dog starts to understand that things are commands. Let's start to implement the structural things. What are we going to do around the home? We've taught them place. Don't forget that. So I think in every room, we should have, every key room anyway, we should have a designated place that the dog goes. It could be a bed, a cato board, whatever you want it to be, but a place that they know. So for instance, if you're going to go into the kitchen with your puppy and they're young, obviously their attention span's pretty short at that point, at maybe 11, 12 weeks of age, we might ask them to go to the cato board or their bed and sit on it for 5 minutes while we do something. And what we're looking for is opportunities to enforce that standard. So when the puppy gets up and wanders off before you allow them off, you don't ask them to go back to the bed. You immediately go over and enforce the standard with the correction. So now the dog understands that it is a standard. It's not an ask. I am subservient to this person. They asked me to stay on that bed. I've got to meet that standard. And eventually they do learn that there's a standard. After, with a puppy, after 5 or 10 minutes, you can invite them off to do what they do. They don't have to be tin soldiers,
Right.
but we're just trying to impress upon them that there are standards, rules, boundaries. This could go on, could happen in any of your key rooms. You go into the living room in the evening to watch TV, don't lock your dog in a crate. They're not learning anything just because you don't want to take the time to help them understand how to be better citizens. Crates are important. They do a great job for us at protecting the dog when we can't be there to protect them, or to help them understand that there are times where they have to be patient while we're doing other things. But use these times, like you're going into the living room to watch a little TV or read a book. You have your designated place. As the dog gets a little older, now it's 20 minutes. Go to your mat. Get up off the bed. I'm not going to ask you. I'm getting up off my butt to enforce the standard. There is a consequence. Don't let your dog jump up on the couch. Don't let your dog sleep in a bed. Oh, but I love my dog. Well, what do you want? Do you want a field trial retriever, a hunt test retriever that can be composed and disciplined, or do you want a pet? You got to ask yourself that. Doesn't mean you can't love them, but there's got to be structure. Other things that we can do, we're getting the food ready. Dogs will be jumping up, and I've had fetch members that have reached out to me and said, Kevin, my dog's barking when I release them for a retrieve. Little puppy's got to do a retrieve down the hall. You let him go and he barks. And the last thing I want to do is point a finger at that right there, at least in that moment, because I don't want to interrupt the desire to retrieve. And we don't really have tools in place to sort of help the dog understand what the problem is, and they don't have enough experience yet to really, give them the resiliency they need to deal with any corrections we might make for noise in that environment. But if we have a dog that's barking at us while we're making food, and we pick up that lead and we snap it and make a pinch collar correction at 12 or 14 weeks of age, not to enforce sit, but to enforce composure, what are we doing? We're teaching the dog that barking, which represents the dog demanding you acquiesce to their demands, you are teaching them that they cannot do that. That dog pulling the line, yeah, go ahead, jump in.
To me, a leash correction is a form of physical correction.
Absolutely.
Okay. I believe.
Sorry, go ahead.
I believe physical corrections are number one way to help change a dog's brain psychology.
Bingo. For those of you that are listening and can't see, I got my 2 thumbs up here. Yeah. We rely far too heavily on the e-collar.
Correct. And, bark collars in a crate or a kennel or whatever. A physical correction in a canine psychology thought process, the analogy I would use is a puppy is bothering the mother puts it in its place and rolls it on its back and puts its mouth on the puppy. Or they're eating at a dead elk and the young dog thinks he's full of himself and comes up, and the alpha comes up and chews his ass out, and now he has to wait till the end to eat, right? Physical correction from the superior, change the behavior from the other dog, and put them in their place, right? But again, it's just changing the brainwave. It's flipping a switch. It's snapping them out of it. Whatever's getting them fired up to go, and bang, they get nailed with a leash, right? And again, that bang can be a light flick of the wrist, or it can be a good jab. Depends on the dog, depends on the situation, da-da-da-da-da. But the point is, it's a physical correction that's enough of a correction to get the desired response. Flip the switch, take a deep breath, calm down. Let's get our composure back.
I totally agree. I think you make a really great point that I think everybody should hear, and I'd like to expand on a little bit, is that some of the tools that we have, pinch collar included, I'm going to talk about e-collar, pinch collar, are quite aggressive tools. And while they are very effective at addressing some behaviors, and they're not always the right tool, because I find that, at least for certain dogs, it causes the dog to become more reactive and less of a thinker. I think we've already mentioned that. And what Bob has just described is exactly the way I feel. When you can make a physical correction that makes the dog feel uncomfortable. So it's very measured. We're not trying to rock the dog's world, but it really is at a lower level that's less stimulating and allows the dog to think, yet startles them enough to go, whoa, what do I need to change about my behavior to get this right? Because it didn't like that, but they're thinking through it more clearly. They tend to come down
Mhm.
emotionally rather than go up, which is what we're really looking for, a dog that will compose himself. Whereas some of these other methods of correction, like pinch collar, like e-collar, they're more reactive to it. When you make those corrections, it's almost like there's a momentary panic mentally. We can't really see it unless you sort of have some experience with this, but there's a momentary panic that prevents them from really thinking through what happened, and they're less likely to compose themselves because they're coming up emotionally. They're not coming down. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but this
Yeah,
is important.
it's really important. And again, I think w- I think I want people to understand that when I'm making a correction, it's the correct amount. And what I mean by that is I don't know what it is. I only know it by doing it, feeling it, seeing the dog's reaction, gauging responses. We talk about dogs jumping on you and you pop them with your knee in the chest. Well, if he does it again immediately, that first one wasn't enough. You know, there
Can we? Sorry, go ahead.
I just think that I want to make sure that people are conscious of that. Me and you aren't just yanking and cranking. We're not. We're every time we're talking about getting these dogs to be composed and they learn from mistakes and we're teaching them that it's not. I'm going in there overly harsh. I'm gauging the correction, and if I have to scale up, I will. If I have to ease back because I did a little too much, I will for the next time. I'm learning as the dog's learning, but you have to do it enough that the dog snaps out of it and can take that deep breath and go, to your point, whoa, what just happened? What was it? I gotta knock this off. Take a deep breath and gain composure.
Let's talk a little bit about what a correction, what physical signs from your dog should you see when you make this correction to understand that you're either at the right level, below the right level, or maybe too high. Because I think you make a very good point, and I'm just assuming here that everybody knows what a correction should look like. But some of the physical signs that I see from a dog when I make one of these lead corrections at any age, and just to make sure everybody understands, a dog can change with respect to the level of pressure they need from day to day, moment to moment.
Right.
They can become less sensitive or more sensitive depending on the state of mind they're in or the level of maturity and experience they have. So you've got to gauge it every time you make a correction. But here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking some of the signs that tell me this dog feels uncomfortable with what just happened. In other words, they feel uncomfortable with the correction of this. They might lick their lips. That is a clear sign that they're feeling some pressure. They might squint their eyes. That's a clear sign they're feeling some pressure. Their ears become a little more pinned back rather than standing upright if we're talking about a Labrador or a Golden Retriever. Um, they they might
Tail,
their
tail
head
goes
or their
level.
tail goes down. Yeah,
Yep.
tail goes down. Yeah. So when I see after a correction, if I see those reactions, I know I'm pretty darn close. I've gotten into this dog's psychology in a way that they're saying, I didn't like that. And I need to start thinking about what I need to change in order to not to happen again. So what are the things I'm not looking for now? If the dog is squealing, I'm clearly way above the level of pressure. If
Yeah.
the dog is running for cover and bolting or trying to get away from you in a panic state, you're using too much pressure. You're up at a level that's, you really need to question. Or if I'm not seeing any reaction at all, meaning none of those signs that I mentioned a moment ago are there, I need to up the pressure. So that's how you can gauge whether or not you're at the right level of pressure or using the right tool. Because like I said, Some dogs require pinch collar. They're not going to respond to a choke chain or a flat collar correction. Puppies,
There's
even.
other pieces of touch too. I've got an example that was pretty hilarious. I was training an English setter, a little bird dog, this like winter, and the owners were the quintessential great people. And the wife had the lovey-dovey, it's my baby mentality, right? Husband had a great understanding. I think he actually listens to podcasts, so text me if I hit this on the head there, bud. Anyways, the dog goes to jump on the wife, and I'm not near the dog to make a physical or a leash correction, and I'm not going to buzz it on the collar. So I take my boot and I touch it just in the rib cage, like just a touch. It immediately snapped the dog out of the high excitement stage, which we can talk about. Remind me to talk about excitement level. It brought her down to a normal level. Forepaws hit the ground, and she was back to normal, being a good dog, respectful. It the dogs get so used to neck popping on the leash, being worked on a leash, e-collar on the neck, all that, that when we use a touch elsewhere, typically for me, it'd be the rib cage, whether it's my hand or my foot, you can get a reaction and it brings them back down. It's just a touch. And she goes, "Did you just kick her?" I go, I guess yes, but I didn't punt her through the field goals. I literally just touched. And you could see her like register it like, yeah, I mean, you didn't kick her, but you used your foot. So if I use my foot equals kick. No, I didn't kick it. I touched it. And that dog went from being out of control excited and, you know, and she kind of helped get it excited, which wasn't helpful. But the point is that physical touch brought the dog back down to a normal level. So I think the idea of where you touch, how you touch, the timing of the touch, the timing of the leash correction, all those things, the firmness, the slightness of it is the finesse art of reading dog body language, reading dog psychology, and figuring out what makes that animal tick. Um, the the corrections, how I scale my corrections, whether it be collar, physical, leash, verbal, whatever, in a low chill state. Dog's just hanging out in the house. To your point, it's on the dog bed. It was there for 5 minutes and it lollygags relaxingly off the bed. That to me is a correction where it can be a low to medium tug on that leash. No, no, kennel or place. It goes back on there. It's back on there for 5 minutes. I got my point across. If it does it 10 seconds later, it's going to be more firm. If the doorbell rings and someone's knocking on the door and the dog's energy level and excitement rises, the correction is going to have to be firmer. The higher drive, the higher the excitement, the higher the anticipation or anxiety or whatever it is, to snap the dog out of it and bring it back down to that normal, it's even keel, you'll have to scale back up and then you scale back down in your corrections. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And you made a really good point earlier. I meant to just touch on a little bit. You said you mentioned the importance of a physical correction, and I absolutely believe in that. When we use a physical correction over an e-collar correction, when it's the dog really recognizes that it's coming from us, that we're the ones that are demanding that they meet the standard. So they learn a certain respect, they learn the hierarchy. So it is really important to, don't rely on the e-collar for this stuff that we're talking about here. The dog is close enough to you that you can get up and deal with it.
Yeah.
All good stuff. I think one or two other things about things you can do around the house definitely is teach your dog that when somebody comes to the door, that they're not permitted to go up running up and barking at. I mean, that's not a good citizen. But people might say, well, I want a dog that doesn't, that protects me, that makes people know I've got a dog in here. Again, what do you want? You want a pet, a guard dog, or a retriever? So, you got to weigh that out. But when somebody comes and knocks on the door, when you say place, they know to go to that place so that you can open up the door, you can invite the guest in, you can bring them into the home, and when it's appropriate, you can invite your dog off the bed, but you enforce that standard. That's easy to set up. I mean, you can set your dog up to teach them that sort of thing. Same thing as when you're exiting the house or you're letting your dogs out to go to the washroom or go load in the car. Your standard needs to be sit, I open the door, I walk through, the dog patiently waits, I invite the dog through the door, they come immediately to the heel position, and then I release them to go do their business if that's the case, or I ask them to walk at heel to the truck.
Mhm.
If you again you're demanding yourself, you're in this case, what's happening here? Let's talk about this particular one because I think it's an important one. The dog is already getting into a state of anticipation. It's kind of like the food bowl, right?
Mhm.
Which is different from taking the dog into the living room with you to read a book. There's no anticipation in that. But when you're going outside, your dog's thinking, oh my God, something's going to happen. We might be going for a car ride. We might be going out to do a drill in the yard, which I absolutely love to do. So when you escalate that level of stimulation, you're getting a different opportunity to really again reinforce that standard, but we're getting closer to that environment. And I think you in life in general, you've got to look for opportunities outside of the retrieving environment to establish these standards so that you can get them when you get to the retrieving environment. And that's going to happen all the time, all the time.
And I'm just going to hit it real quick. Remember that this is a crawl, walk, run deal. Even though that we're holding young dogs and puppies to a standard, and but we're still in the teaching phases, right? They're not going to be perfect the first time you do this. They're not going to be perfect the 20th time you do this. This is just a long process of getting your brain, the listener's brain, to think about raising a puppy that has structure and is learning how to learn, learning how to be a good citizen. Your 8-year-old child still made mistakes, and you had been trying to raise it right for the last 8 years. Um, you know, I'm 38, still making mistakes, still disappointing the old parents once in a great while. I believe it. I'll learn someday. Kevin just smiled. He's on mute, but he's laughing. Um, the point is, it's it's a it's a long process to get to where we want to be. But if we follow this kind of thought process and methodology, we're stacking the deck in our favor. That as we're advancing these dogs in the retriever game, we're going to have less likelihood of negative behaviors that we want because we've had a standard throughout its life, and then we've got standards here too. Like it's just hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful point that we who have been in the sport for so long often forget. It's so fundamental to who we are. But anybody that's new to the sport and they've got their first or second dog, they do need to understand that creating habits don't happen like that. Sorry, did I say standards? I meant to say habits if I didn't say habits. Creating a habit is really hard. If I want you to create the habit of reading a book for 10 minutes in the morning rather than flipping through your phone, I've got to remind you probably 10 times every time you get up in the morning and pick up your phone to start thumbing through social media before you start to change the habit and it becomes second nature. It's not, habits are not formed in the moment. They require a great deal of patience and a great deal of restraint on our part to make sure that we're always measured, that we never escalate inappropriately just because our dog failed to do it the third time. This you make a great point. I love that.
Cool. Now, I feel like we hit home on the home.
Yes.
What are we doing to maintain retrieve drive, maintain? Because again, I still like having that fine line, a balancing act of the confident puppy that is able to adventure and not be afraid of the wind blowing a stick from the tree and falling or the trash can tipping over. Like there's still this happy medium of socialization and encouragement and positive vibes while maintaining rules, boundaries, and limitations.
Absolutely. And I want the listeners to know that we're not, we're, the dog still has to be socialized and exposed to all of the things that, you can learn to develop a phobia of for inexplicable reasons. And we don't want to limit any of that. We don't want to limit them from experiencing life. We're just
Right.
saying you have to do it in a structured way. Um, can I just want to mention one point before we go in here? And we keep
Yeah.
saying puppy, 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 puppy. I mean, this is a lifelong, this is your lifelong goal is to have these kinds of standards.
I would
And
also hit on if you have a dog that has those leaking behaviors, go back and do this.
I can do this, or even if you don't. I mean, this is not just about leaking behaviors. It's about, remember what we said, we're here to develop a dog that will be a team player, that will be very responsive. And there's more boundaries out there than just being quiet and walking to the line. Dog has to stop to the whistle. The dog has to take cast in a pretty disciplined manner. The dog has to be under control in very stimulating circumstances where there might be poison birds or scent or wolf falls. Dog has to be disciplined about holding lines when there are factors pushing up. So it's more than just the stuff that's happening on the mat that we're trying to achieve here. It is a team player who will work with us on the mat when we're trying to communicate, but also will maintain the standards in the field when they get further and further and further away from us, where distance seems to erode control. So maintaining this standard throughout a dog's life is very important. And if you have a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, hey, there's no reason why you can't stop now. Or sorry, can't start now.
Right, right, right.
We've been going at this for a minute.
Yeah.
So back to your point, yeah, we do want to do retrieving. In all the ways that we've done it. I'm not sure everybody understands the ways that we've done it, but I want to cover a few things. Number one, my puppy's not going to be allowed to retrieve, and I think that's one of the things in my notes here. If I'm doing some retrieving and my puppy barks, I'm not letting it get the retrieve. That's a no-brainer for me. You are not going to demand. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to correct it, but the puppy's going to learn that demanding something doesn't get them the result they want. So the first time you allow that behavior to be enforced by letting your puppy go when they bark, you've just sealed the deal.
Yeah,
It's everybody thinks it's cute. Oh, my dog loves to retrieve. I can't believe it. This is the dog I've always dreamed of. Look how enthusiastic she is. I couldn't have asked for a better puppy. And they let it go on and on and on.
right.
You are playing with fire. The analogy I like to use is, you know, you've got a car. You've got a Formula One race car, and you've got a Mini Cooper. Your Formula One race car is your retriever, your field-bred retriever. Your Mini Cooper is a pug. Okay, obviously, what stimulates those two dogs and gets them excited, or the level of excitement that we get, is totally different. And we've got to treat a Formula One race car with respect, just like we do a retriever. If you step on the throttle in a Formula One race car, you're going to be in the wall before you know it. A Mini Cooper, you're doing 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. So not too much to worry about there. But that's the same thing with the retriever. You're going to be in the wall before you know it if you don't treat this animal with respect. Stop the problem now. Change the culture. Understand what you're dealing with.
Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. So I agree with what you said about the noise from a puppy. uh, I guess there's certain things that like I feel like I don't have to deal with from ones I raise because of what we've just spent an hour and 20 minutes talking about. um, but I would agree. Like I think there's still structure behind them. I don't hold puppies steady and make them watch the whole mark and then send them. I let them break. I'm letting them watch the gunner throw it and letting go. But to your point, I'm not letting them squeal off the line. I'm not letting them, you know, run willy nilly through the field for 20 minutes and I can't catch them. I'm going to start mitigating some of those things at a young age by encouraging them to do it the right way, right? And there's, you know, we really can't get into every aspect of, you know, how do you get a puppy to come back when it doesn't want to bring it, and how do you stop this and that? But the idea behind it is a lot of these problems, if you never really allow it to begin, then they don't know that that's even an option. And so just the thousand tips and tricks from all the podcasts that we've done and the videos that we've done in your retriever program gives you, your fetch program for retrievers is what I meant, uh, gives you a foundation of how to kind of set them up, set them and you up for success so that the likelihood of these things happening to you are so much slimmer. So we don't have to problem solve every issue. Um, but I guess my thought is I'm still taking them to the field. They're still getting marks. They're still getting fun swimming sessions. They're still going on hiking adventures where they're clambering over stumps and logs. Still tons of treat training when they do the right things, corrections when they don't. And in essence, I want them to be a puppy but with self control and a process of learning how to be a nice puppy, a nice citizen. No jumping, no barking, no whining. You know, if I ask you to do something, I've got tools in the tool belt, check cords, treats, things like that to maintain my standards. Do you want to add anything to that, or should we talk about and
I
then?
do want I do want to add a little to it because I
Yeah,
think
go for it.
on a certain level I agree, but I think there's got to be some room here to
Mhm.
be flexible. Um, a 7 week old puppy is not the same as a 12 week old puppy or a 16 week old puppy. So, yes, I'm retrieving in the hallway with a 7 week old puppy or in the house. I mean, I'm certainly not going to ask them to be steady. That's a no brainer for me. But I know that when I'm getting to 12 weeks of age, I'm certainly at a point now where I'm thinking about developing memory. I know I am, in fact, with multiple retrieves. And the dog definitely has to have some steadiness by that point. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the dog at a certain point, when you feel it's ready, somewhere around the 12 weeks of age, or when you feel you're getting out of the house and into the yard to do retrieving, um, you can start to not, you're not enforcing steadiness, but you're insisting on a standard, which means I'm not correcting for lack of steadiness. I'm shaping behavior by restraining the puppy, whether that's holding their butt on the ground and putting a hand under the collar. So I have a little more, I'm beginning to develop the habit, because remember, we're trying to create the right habits, not allow the wrong habits to develop for too long. Um, and I just believe it's easier to make patience part of the culture than try to insist on it later on. So that's just a small thing. I don't think we're very much different there. I don't know how long you let them go on, just to let them go in the things in the air. But anyway,
I'm
that's sort of,
probably going to let it go longer than 12 weeks. But again, I also think that I'm thinking about dogs that I'm getting at 6, 8 months old that don't know anything versus a dog that I've raised. So
yeah.
that's two different ball games we're playing with, right? An 8 month old puppy that doesn't know anything from, you know, from its, and I've got to train it. I'm going to develop it and allow it to break and then start shaping it and molding it. The I still probably wouldn't do it at 12 weeks, but I understand your process of a dog that I've been working for myself. I'm probably holding back a little longer. I'm probably not that different from you, but I'm thinking,
Yeah, and to speak to your point a little bit earlier, every dog is an individual. I've seen dogs that scare the crap out of me when they're 15 weeks of age, and I'm like, oh my God, this thing's on fire. I need to start setting my standards now. And I've
yep,
seen dogs that are 5 months of age, 6 months of age, 7 months of age, and I'm like, I'm really still trying to make sure that I'm developing the passion for retrieving. So you've got to really look at every dog as an individual.
Yeah,
Uh,
great point.
and remember, they're changing dramatically day to day. So what you saw yesterday doesn't mean you're going to see the same thing today.
Great point.
Uh,
Great point.
just trying to
Let's
think.
take a sec. Let's go to segment 2. I think we hit that one pretty good. Segment
Okay.
2 is basically, I've got 20 something dogs in the kennel right now, and I've got one that on the trailer, in the crate, at the line, walking to the line is noisy. And this could be someone, you know, they can go back and listen to the whole first hour and change of this episode and start implementing those rules into the house. But now we're here doing the work, trying to fix what we have, in essence, allowed. What are some of the things that you implement with a dog that may come to your seminars or workshops, or you're coaching them on your online programs? What are you doing to help them combat the vocalizing and the movement at the line?
So I'm going to speak to your question right there, but also sort of address another problem that we have in the retriever community, and that is that I think trainers, and I was a pro in the past and perfect, very guilty of this, professional trainer myself, um, and that is not giving our owners the tools to establish the type of stuff that we said here today. Having the conversation, giving them a handout. How hard is it to get on the computer and type out a handout there? You don't even have to type anymore. You just have to talk into something and it will type it out for you. And if you don't like the grammar, throw it in AI and it'll spit it out real pretty for you. So if we're not producing something that we can hand to our owners, when your owner says to you, hey Bob, I'm getting a puppy down the road, or I'm getting a puppy and I just got my puppy, you can say, oh Sally, that's great, I'm so excited for you, really want you to look at this, read it and implement it, and if you have questions, come back to me. That's got to change culturally within our environment. Because Bob, do you like getting a dog that's an idiot? Do you like getting one that you've got to clamp down on and you've got problems and you're like, oh my God, I don't,
No,
this is
but
going
if they were all easy, I wouldn't have a job. But you're right. I do not want 20.
to, what puppy do you want?
Right.
And does a puppy's training start at 6 months of age when you get them? Or when should it actually start? Would you like your owner to develop the retrieving before you get them? Or do you want to get them at 6 months and they haven't even been potty trained? They've been sitting in the kennel for 6 months.
Correct.
The answer is easy for me anyway. And
You're
that is, I want them to develop retrieving. I want them to develop all the things that we talked about here today. I want them to develop memory and a whole bunch of other things we've already talked about in your program before, so that when I get them at 6 months of age, we're really on the right track to not having to fix any problems. We've really developed some great habits and some great skills. And I can really now take a dog that's had a great beginning and mold and shape them into the dog that this owner truly wants and can be successful with and can enjoy running. That's a huge part of it too, right?
Yeah.
You want your owners to enjoy running their dogs. So I think, again, I'm going to speak to the cultural shift that has to change. Retriever clubs need to help out their members with stuff like this. Professional trainers have to help out their clients with this kind of stuff. You and I are trying to do it right now through these podcasts, and whether it's a Facebook post I put out or a blog clip on my website, I think I'm really seeing the retriever community come together, but this is one we could truly make a difference in.
Yeah.
So back to your original question. Now, what do we do with the dog that has a noise and composure issue? And these are the toughest ones to deal with. And that's why we're here today trying to prevent it, because they are the toughest ones to deal with. There's no magic bullet. That's how we started out this podcast, by saying that we've learned that pointing a finger directly at the problem in most cases doesn't work. Pointing a finger directly at the noise doesn't work. I believe you had Randy Bohn on, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I've had Randy Bohn on for my fetch members. And Randy, for those of you that don't know, Randy has a process that he uses to, I believe, establish hierarchy in the relationship if you really examine it. And I've learned a lot from Randy through his conversations with him and reading his book. Um, I and Randy, what Randy is saying is that no, pointing a finger directly at the noise doesn't work. There's other things you have to do. You have to put in a foundation that creates the hierarchy and the respect and the composure that you're doing by doing all of this other work. If you're coming here to ask me what the magic bullet is and what's here's the trick that I use and it works, I'm not going to give it to you. I might have a few, and every dog that has this problem is different. What they react to, how they react, what correction might help to minimize the problem. uh, every dog is unique. I have these discussions all the time, and for me it's often like, try this. Okay, that didn't work, or maybe it worked a little bit, or we got this result. Okay, let's adjust it, or we're going to try something completely different. Oh, we created a new problem, right? We're starting to work on the noise, but we created a no going problem now. Okay, how are we gonna work past this? So it's hard for me to say. I'm just afraid to actually say, here's your magic bullet. Go out and do it. Can you understand that?
Yeah, no, I think that's the crappy part of this. That's why the first hour and change of this podcast was so important to mitigate the likelihood of it happening. If you can do what we talked about in the first hour and change, the likelihood is less. I think, just to recap the Randy Bohn in a 30-second view is like, it's just sit. He takes all the environmental cues that drive that dog into craziness and just makes them sit. And a very structured, he can do circles around the dog this way, that way, and they just learn to relax. Because even the dogs that just like get pulled off of a truck, they're already spiked. So like you can just sit in the yard, and then he makes them sit and watch other dogs work from 100 yards away, and just he eases them back into it. And the moment they go back into that red zone, crackhead noise, you go backwards and you restart the process again. And until he can go from A to B to C, which might take a week, might take 8 weeks, might take 8 months, he doesn't get what he wants. The dog doesn't get to get what he wants. And I think that is a process that, to me, sounds like the silver bullet that we're afraid to say because it still may not work, or it may solve it for a little while and then it creeps back as you get back into the routine of regular training. But the idea of every dog is different. I might take a dog that you trained that's noisy, and because I'm handling it different and I hold it to a different standard and I poke and prod and whatever, I get a different result. Vice versa, right? I also think that there's a theory behind they may be not challenged enough. If their brain is thinking because the task is so difficult, now they're less likelihood to make noise because they're like, shit, I got to really think about this, right? So your training may be too easy, and so the anticipation of the easy reward is so high. The pressure may be too much, and therefore the anxiety. So you have to, like, these are all thought processes of why a dog makes noise or moves too much. And then if I can figure out why my dog started this, then I can dissect and problem solve my way out of it, right? That's all this is. It's all problem solving. It's all in the moment, and it's all today doesn't fix it. It's a process. Um, I mean, physical corrections for me is a big one. I think, and then they get denied the thing that they want the most. It's it sucks. I one of the tactics I've done is like you put a prong collar on a rope, and for the dogs that like bark as they leave the line, boom, they They are quiet, they get the retrieve, they make a noise, they catch the end of the rope. Throw it again. Okay, now we created the no-go issue. Like, you have to do something, but you also can't, it may not work, right? So I think that your point, there's no silver bullet. Randy's pretty dang spot on with his book. And Kevin, if you want to link that in the show notes, I would appreciate it. We'll sell some more for him. That'd be great. We'll start getting 10%, huh? What do you think, Randy?
I was
Uh,
just like, let's stop having this problem more than anything. That would be
Me
the
too. And I think the whole first portion of our podcast is imperative, because whether you have the 2-year-old that has this problem and you really reflect on the day-to-day life of that dog, and you go, huh, that made me think of 18 things throughout my day I could do differently. It may help you in the field. It probably will. It won't fix it this week, but in 6 months, it may, right? It's a process.
that would be the one point I would make here for sure, is that um, working on a noise issue, getting results on a noise issue is not something you're going to see in a matter of days or even weeks in most cases. You're usually talking months.
Yeah.
So you have to believe in whatever process you choose to follow. That's one of the keys that I've learned. People are it's really hard to do now, but it's because when you don't see the results quickly, you're like, well, that's not working. I need to move on to something else.
Right.
But in reality, these problems are so ingrained and complex that I think we're required to trust the process longer. And Randy, I mean, if you follow Randy's book, he says you can't even retrieve while you're going through his book. And most people that are in the fetch program that have used this have been doing it for months, not weeks.
Right.
Uh, and that's hard to do, to trust the process for that long and hope that you come out the other side with the right results. And there's no guarantees.
Correct.
Uh,
Actually, I
so
think Mike Lardy was doing a deal with Pat Burns, and basically he said, just get another dog. And I know that that's flippant, and I know that that is not an answer for the 1 or 2 dog owner who it is their buddy and the unspoken bond that we all talk about and love. But he kind of also isn't, like, I kind of have to believe it too. Like, it is, it's almost like having a dog, reactive dog. Like, you're kind of living with it. You know, you're kind of mitigating it throughout its whole life. If it is ingrained in their brain to be noisy as shit and you've done all the right things and it's still noisy, at some point you have to say, I was hoping for a master hunter or an FC, and this son of a gun can't even go and pick up a double because it's noisy, or I can't even enjoy my duck hunt because it's noisy, like through the roof. These are all things we can help you with, folks. But there also is a point where it's like, I don't know.
well,
So there's part of that. I'm just saying, the guy who's trained more FCs than anybody in the world, I get his point. It's tough. It's not a easy problem.
I think that answer is a little too easy because it only applies to 10% of retriever owners out there, if that many. I know very few owners that would give up on a dog.
Well,
So I
that's my
don't think
point.
it's a realistic answer. It's an
But
easy answer, but it's not necessarily a realistic answer. And
that's why
our
I'm
job
saying it was
is to
flippant.
try and help help people. And I think I've seen people make progress, and I don't want to give people false hope because sometimes it's very difficult, but there are a lot of problems. There isn't a dog out there that will do well in the sport and not have a significant problem at some point in their career. This one is very difficult. You know, freezing on birds is another one that's very difficult to overcome, but I have seen it done. And if somebody truly loves their dog and they enjoy going to line with it, even though it has this problem, and they're willing to keep trying, then I'm here to help and encourage them as much as I can.
I am too. I guess the point I was trying to make is that is how difficult this is to fix. That's why it's not a 1 week, 1 month process. Like, it's that difficult and can be that complicated and nuanced that there's no silver bullet, and there's no way of me and you sitting here saying we can 100% fix that dog. It's just like it's a challenge, and that's why mitigating it from a young age is important, and building the right ways for that dog to learn is important, and a good citizen in the home and in the field is important. And if you do those things, you're probably going to be in luck.
Yeah. I just going to tell one other story because I know there are people out there like the ones we just talked about a moment ago. Um, there was a person I was trying to help with noise and composure issues. And it became apparent that we didn't have the answer. I'm not saying there wasn't an answer, but certainly at that time, the dog is still around, but we didn't have the answer that was going to really move the needle enough that we were going to change things much. And what we always have to ask ourselves is, do I enjoy training this dog? Do I enjoy spending the time with this dog? He isn't perfect or she isn't perfect, but do I truly enjoy working with this dog? And does this dog enjoy what they're doing? Those are always the first two questions to ask. And then the conversation I had with this person is, this is a reality. Your dog is noisy, and I don't think we're going to get it under control, or your dog can't get their composure right online. But enjoy what your dog is going to teach you. If this is one you're not going to part with and you want to continue to train, overlook the noise and composure as much as you can, meaning don't let it bother you. I'm not saying you try to maintain you don't try to maintain some standards. Certainly not going to beat up on the dog anymore. We're going to accept it. And then enjoy what that dog is going to teach you beyond the noise and composure issues. And that's what this person did, and has really enjoyed. The dog is retired now, but learned to really enjoy the experience of training that dog.
Yeah.
And has since moved on to another dog. And I know he's going to listen to your podcast. He always does, and he's going to know who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's the answer.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have a client whose dog uh, is only noisy during goose hunts, and it's bad. But I was like, well, here's the thing. Like, we've done all we could. Can you find a way to still enjoy him? He loves it. He's really good at it. Can you take a deep breath when you're like ready to lose your top and have everything explode out your ears, and just take a deep breath and say, man, he's having a time of his life. Let him rip, baby. And after 10 retrieves, he finally settles down. And to your point, it's like he learned to do that. And once he was able to take that deep breath, the pressure of the dog being perfect eased everybody, right? And it's not what I would want, and it's not what he would want, but hey, he loves his dog, and that's kind of what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Sometimes we
great
just
point.
have to accept certain things.
Great.
I do have one other point to make, but can I make a little plug before I do make my?
Yeah, buddy.
Well, everybody knows. I think most people know me now, and those of you that don't, my name is Kevin Cheff. I'm the retriever coach. I coach people all over the world, really, who are training retrievers. Uh, and my job really is one of a guide. I guide people. That's how I look at myself. I have conversations with people about how their training is going, or what problem they're having, or their training plan, or whatever it is. Which those are the things I love to do, and help them to understand the pathway, or the methodology, or the philosophy behind something, uh, to achieve what they want to achieve. And I do that through my in-person um, uh, web seminars,
Yeah.
workshops. But primarily now it's mostly through my Fetch program, which is a membership program, where people can join, and they get access to a full catalog of training material that's laid out in a very methodologic anyway way. Can't pronounce that tonight for some reason. And not only does it show you, how to train the dog, but also why you're doing it, where your focus needs to go, how do you react to every situation that might come up, And we're talking about everything from, fundamentals to advanced training, marking and blinds, and includes webinars and all sorts of other things. But I strongly encourage everybody to go and check my website out, www.theretrievercoach.com. And there's lots of freebies there. We have free resources. We have a blog where we talk about things like we're talking about here tonight, because my goal is to really just help anybody out there that wants to train a retriever and that's willing to put the effort in to be successful. All they're missing is sometimes it's the knowledge and the tools, and that's where I come in. My last point that I wanted to make, because I kind of missed it, and it's kind of backing up a little bit, was, these young dogs. I think we've got to be mindful about how we're introducing stimulation. That was one thing we didn't talk about. I just skipped over it somehow. But as we're developing the dog's desire to retrieve and we're bringing them into the outdoor environment where they're retrieving, we've got to be mindful of introducing stimulation in a gradual process so that we're constantly monitoring how's our dog reacting to that stimulation. And if you don't know what I mean by stimulation, it's birds, it's guns, it's duck calls, it's live flyers, it's the excitement of close-in retrieves, it's multiples. It's all of those things, and you can probably come up with some more. And I think we've really got to slow down a little bit and make sure that we're only, we're progressively introducing a little bit more stimulation gradually, so that we can see, well, how is our dog behaving? How are they coming to line today versus how they came to line yesterday after that stimulation? Do I need to back off on the level of stimulation and make sure I've got the standards that I need, that they're ingrained, so I'm creating some good habits? And do I need to remove the gunshot out in the field, and just throw a shackle duck rather than shoot a bird, sort of thing? Think about all the ways you're going to gradually introduce this stimulation. Monitor your dog's behavior. Do not overlook a single thing. That's my big, thing I want to say here. These people that are letting their dogs sit on the stakeout behind them, barking away like a mad fool, and thinking that that's great because they're just so enthusiastic. You're in trouble.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Or they're letting them bark in the truck and, foam and froth. Don't let that happen. Be close enough to be able to deal with it.
Yeah. Oh, those are all things that make me go a little bit nutty. If you want to see me lose my patience, have a dog barking for no reason in my trailer. That'll get me going. But anyways, Kevin, the retriever coach, appreciate you. Another great podcast full of information. Everybody, the show notes are going to have where you can find him. But again, thank you all for tuning into another great episode. Kevin, thank you so much for being a part of the show again. And everyone, we're gonna do a 7 minutes in heaven. So some point you're gonna hear Kevin back in the game. So Kevin, thank you so much for your time this evening, and Kevin Owens, thank you so much too, big fella.